The post-war multilateral system is broken, dysfunctional, and no longer fit for purpose. And the escalating trade tariff war may be. Africa and China have emerged as pivotal partners in this shifting landscape, bound by history, powered by mutual interest, and grounded in a shared future. 2 days after Kenya gained independence, in December 1963, China opened its embassy in Nairobi, becoming the 4th country to do so. Our ties have only deepened since, culminating in the establishment of a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership in 2017. China is now sub-Saharan Africa's largest trading partner and Kenya's largest overall. We export tea, coffee, flowers, and more. And I trust many of you may have enjoyed a cup of Kenyan tea or coffee, or a bouquet of fresh flowers or roses from Kenya. Over 3,000 Chinese companies operate in Africa, 500 of them in Kenya, most from the private sector. Our cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative has delivered flagship infrastructure projects including roads, ports, and the standard gauge railway infrastructure that is reshaping national connectivity and regional integration. But even as we celebrate these achievements, we must confront a sobering truth. The post-war multilateral system is broken, dysfunctional, and no longer fit for purpose. And the escalating trade tariff war may be its final death blow. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to give my perspectives on 4 key aspects, namely peace and security, the climate change crisis, the global financial architecture, and matters global trade, and suggest possible ideas on the way forward. On the United Nations and the UN Security Council, no other circumstance other than the post-war situation would have made the current structure of the UN, and more particularly, the UN Security Council, and that is the 5 permanent members with individual powers, an acceptable peace and security architecture. The Security Council, once a beacon of peace and diplomacy, now has 1 permanent member invading one country, while another member takes sides in conflict, in direct contradiction to the Council's own resolutions. Yet today, the permanent members live in denial and resist reform, even as the Security Council becomes less and less legitimate and its relevance is being put to question. On the other hand, the global multilateral financial architecture is simply outdated. The Bretton Woods institutions recently celebrated their 80th anniversary. 80 years ago, we all know 2/3 of the world's nations did not exist as states when this architecture came into being. The IMF was established to buttress the gold standard fixed exchange rate system, a system that collapsed 50 years ago. The World Bank, on the other hand, was established to rebuild Europe, an assignment now very well overtaken by events. This financial architecture that we have today presents 4 intertwined challenges. Number 1, the challenge of liquidity or financial safety net for the multiple and persistent climate and economic shocks that we face today. Secondly, inadequate finance for development and climate action. And number three, cost of capital, what we are calling the great financial divide. And lastly, the problem of recurring debt crisis in developing countries, which is a consequence of the first three. The climate crisis is perhaps the most urgent and existential challenge of our time. Africa, despite contributing the least to global emissions, bear the greatest burden through floods, droughts, displacement, and food insecurity. We have scientific consensus that these extreme weather events are human-induced. But even if it were otherwise, decarbonization of the economy is progress in its own right. Conservation of nature and clean air are desirable ends in and of themselves. But 30 COP conferences later, national interests continue to stand in the way of global collective action, notwithstanding the fact that the atmosphere has no national boundaries. We continue, in my opinion, to play dice with nature. When the World Trade Organization was mooted in 1945, world trade consisted primarily of goods. The wealthy industrial countries exported manufactured goods, while the less developed countries exported primary products and raw materials. But today, the world of trade has changed dramatically. Trade in services now accounts for a quarter of global trade and are growing 3 times faster than the merchandise trade. The business process outsourcing, BPO commonly known as, and IT-enabled services, which were inconceivable in 1945, are currently in the order of $300 billion and projected to grow at 10% annually over the next decade. Trading services, particularly digitally enabled services, defies the traditional goods logic, as it enables professionals in developing countries to compete with their counterparts in industrialized countries with a lot of ease. But this leveling of the playing field goes beyond digital services. For example, affordable air travel enabled medical tourism to emerge as a growth industry. Ladies and gentlemen, having contextualized the situation as it is now, allow me at this point to suggest my views on where I consider the opportunities of the future to be. Let me put some context to this. For the first 45 years of its existence, the post-war multilateral system was shaped by bipolar ideological divide of the Cold War. This divide, the East-West divide, suggests that we are unable to overcome the bipolar of that era, or the bipartisanship or bipolarism of that era. Seemingly, there appears to be Cold War warriors that are unable to see a world that is not ideologically polarized and are determined to reinvent a polarized world by every means possible. In a world where globalization is no longer an option, but an existential imperative, any polarization is undesirable, unnecessary, and untenable. Two structural forces, in my opinion, have driven globalization, namely technology and demography, they are irreversible. Until very recently, perhaps no more than a decade ago, it was taken for granted that the industrialized West would maintain a competitive advantage in high technology industries, while the global South would remain in low-tech, labor-intensive, and primary goods industries. Today, disruptive, cutting-edge innovation can pop up anywhere in the world. The DeepSeek AI disruption and Kenya's revolutionary mobile money transfer technology are glaring signs of our times. Additionally, there is a saying that demography is destiny. Economic development cannot be divorced from demographics. It is people who produce, and it is people who consume or provide a market. At the dawn of African independence in 1960, the combined population of the US and the European Union at 520 million was double that of Africa at 260 million. 6 decades on, it is the opposite or the reverse. Africa's population of 1.5 billion is now double the combined US-EU population of 800 million. The demographic dynamic has an inevitability about it. Aging societies would want We must therefore imagine a new peace and security architecture, one rooted in democracy, equity, transparency, and equal representation. It is my view that the security architecture of the world should be representative of the 5 continental blocks. That is the Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa and Middle East, with equal representation for each of the regions. Seeing as Europe already has 3 members, France, the UK, and Russia, it seems reasonable to all of us that the membership for each region be set at 3, so that we end up with a total of 12 permanent members. Such a council would better reflect today's geopolitical realities and uphold the principle of sovereign equality among nations. On the other hand, global opinion is divided on whether the current international financial architecture can be reformed. Many people tell me it cannot. My view is that as difficult as it is still easier to reform this financial architecture, even though the latter would be a better option. At the heart of the Bretton Woods institution is a fundamental issue. These are shareholder institutions. At the time they were formed, the shareholders were also the primary stakeholders and beneficiaries. Both the World Bank and IMF have evolved into development finance institutions, but the ownership and power remains with the wealthy countries that they no longer serve. The interests of the shareholders and stakeholders and beneficiaries are at great variance almost all the time. This anomaly became apparently glaring during the IMF SDR issuance, where 64% of allocations ended up in wealthy countries that did not need liquidity support. The poorest countries, which needed it most, received only 2.4%. That is the extent of disconnect between the shareholders' interests and the stakeholders and beneficiaries' interests. There are many reforms required of these institutions, but I believe that the most consequential is governance changes that will transform them into independent, apolitical, global institutions, insulated from the national interest of their shareholders.
Welcome back. It's a very, very powerful speech from President of Kenya. Kenya is from Africa. President William Ruto is the President of Africa. He was speaking during a China visit. He was talking about the unity of Africa. As we all know that Africa is the enemy of unity, and he was really pushing for Africa to unite it and really pushing for disunity among us. That speech made United States to react badly towards Kenya, as we all know that Kenya was benefiting a lot from America, because we have a lot of these GMOs, a lot of NGOs, a lot of things is being Kenya being benefiting from those countries. But President William Ruto delivered a very powerful message which shaken the world. All people clapped him and looked at them that really he is really Pan-Africanism. But he spoke about monetary IMF bank. IMF bank, he was told that we people of don't charge us with a high interest, because IMF bank is the bank of those white people. He was telling that don't do this, don't charge us with a lot interest. He was talking about World Bank. World Bank is the bank that given a lot of African Caribbean people a loan. So he was talking that please don't give her to the light loan, and he was telling that this when these people want to import the items, he was telling them that we must use our own currency. He was advocating for real currency, because we know that US dollars and euro are too expensive to us. So he was advocating that we can use our own currency to develop our own country. And he was saying that Africa must now have our own currency, because now when you go to Europe, they have their own currency like euro. When you go to US, you have their own dollars. When you go to those countries in Caribbean, go to Chad, anywhere. So he was telling that we Africa, we must now have our own currency, which this speech also champions by Ibrahim Traore for being have our own currency to develop our own country. So he was speaking, and this made Trump and administration to tremble. Why? Because they saw that Africa has a brave leader, and as all we know that these people, they don't want a brave leader, they want a puppet leader. So they saw that Africa has now started rising. A lot of leaders has come out and have started rising. So they wanted to stop him, and that's what made them to force LGBTQ to Kenya. We saw all in internet Kenyans crying about LGBTQ to be used in Kenya. Most of people cried because of these people were wanted to be come with this Western country. They bring what about GMO to Kenya? GMO is from these people. So when President spoke after that speech, he started receiving a lot of calls, some threatening them, I will cut tie with you because of cooperating with China. And we all know that China has been a friend of Kenya. When you come now to Kenya, most of these roads are being built by Chinese. Most of these houses are being built by Chinese. Most of contract, and President William Ruto wanted to scrap away with the Chinese because he was just speaking from his reality. But because of unity, we find that most of the African leaders started blaming William Ruto for speaking about unity, because we are the enemy of unity in Africa. It's just the reality. We are the unity of Africa. But if we can have a president like William Ruto and Ibrahim Traore, will go far, because those people is a visionary leader. They speak the reality. And we saw Ibrahim Traore warning President Ruto that do this, because those people are friends and they are fearless. So he spoke a very powerful message, and please, let's follow the suit of President William, who has done a very good work championing for advocating for we as Africa. And he was peace and unity, because peace is a problem now in Africa. In Africa, when you come to Africa, insecurity everywhere because of so-called these countries. Thank you so much for watching my video. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, share and comment. Bye for now, and I'll come back with more reaction. Please kindly share my video. Let's share to all, send this video to all African people so that they can see the unity that we are advocating as we as Africa. Bye for now.